I think this conference is very important because particularly the central theme around which the deliberations are taking place today, which is on modern slavery, and also the problems of communities discriminated on account of the work which they are doing and their own historical legacies, the intergenerational experiences of these communities. And I think because of that, this conference is very significant. And the other aspect is that it is not just concerned about something that happens in India alone. So, for example, if we look at the ways in which discussions are taken place today, we know that people have been discussing about the communities that are discriminated against on the basis of work and their pedigree in various parts of the world. We have broadly here in South Asia, we have been talking about this. But in addition to that, scholars have been talking about experiences in Africa, Southeast Asia and other places, and therefore there is a global sweep in that sense, and bringing together this very significant experiences of people which are not exactly dealt with in the academia. I think this conference is significant. Another point which I wish to state is that although we have very vibrant scholarly community in India of social scientists, historians, sociologists, etc., we are yet to see a very significant ways in which historians or sociologists talking about slavery that existed in India historically, as well as the continuing forms of slavery which we experience today. So, therefore, I think today's conference and the two reports that have been published become very, very seminal in this context. So, it breaks a certain kind of silence which has been there in academic practice, which has been there in critical social science writing and understanding of Indian society generally. My understanding is that there is a crossover of this. There is something like that if you want to talk about communities discriminated against in terms of work, which in fact brings in a long history of that. Now, having listened to scholars and activists working across and along with communities in various parts of the country, and I have a feeling that their studies could really highlight the historical experiences of these communities, which in fact are centuries old in a way. Although there could be changes across centuries, we find that certain aspects of these relationships continue to exist. So, I can give you any number of examples to show this. For example, if we take the agricultural sector, communities that are discriminated against on the basis of work soon could be identified as agricultural laborers. Or people, if you take commodity production, in the rural areas or even in semi-urban areas, you have specialized people belonging to certain particular communities engaging in the production of certain commodities, and because they deal with such things like we have tanneries, we have leather industry and so on. Although these are finely chiseled kind of products that come out of this, if you look at the early phase of tanneries, the work in the tanneries, processing hides and skin, we know that across the country only one particular group will be engaged in that sort of work, and that community's name could be different in different parts of the country. In the Tamil region there could be different, in Uttar Pradesh there could be different, that sort of differences could be there, but by and large there is people who are engaged in this. But there is a skill involved in it, they are fine craftsmen, they know how to do this. But then they face a lot of discrimination in society, and therefore across generations you find these discriminations are being practiced. And now if you want to determine the history of that, easily this could be pushed back in time to hundreds of years. This is my feeling. The example of agricultural laboring, I said. Similarly, we could think of a number of similar works which are very essential for the existence of our society, the production of wealth, exchange. These are the fundamental things of any economy. But then people who are engaged in this very significant work of the economy, of the society, they face discrimination. Now, two things needs to be thought about. One is the long histories of that. The other one probably is some of the things which have happened of late. For example, the kind of sex slavery that have been discussed here, or the kind of other sort of discriminations that we have been talking about, the human trafficking, etc. Some of this could be very recent phenomena. But then, who are the people who are being drawn into this sort of networks or exchange, or people being exchanged as commodities? Who are the people who really suffer? Then we find that many of them are from the historically marginalized communities. So therefore, as a student of history, I find that there is a significant traits which will tell us that, look, here is a continuity of this sort of discrimination, and therefore we need to address that. The other aspect is that unless we build this sort of relationship based on substantial research, rational argument, bringing in a whole range of embedding this in social scientific knowledge, we would be in a position to leave this completely out, because we have, even in the secular academia, people questioning our kind of interpretation, and therefore hard research as it is being done today by this institute is very, very significant. So therefore, I wish to say that we need to show the historical antecedents and the continuities, but at the same time we shall be open to the new developments. And so my last point in relation to this is to be mindful of, for example, many things that are happening today in the context of neoliberal capitalism, which are in certain ways something unthinkable, because if you look at the sheer number of wealth involved in all these sort of activities, the kind of money that is involved, which is very substantial. But then we are living in a neoliberal situation where people think that capitalism of the current variety will resolve all these problems. But not only that, it is not resolving this, but we enter into new stages of problems. There again, who are suffering? So if you ask this question, then you find that the traditionally exploited social groups are suffering. I think this happens almost all over the country, all over India. This sort of things are happening, and the current engagement that we are having today, I think, is a right step, and this can really have a significant effect, I believe, in academic professions of history writing, sociological research, social anthropological research, etc. in India, because those scholars will be forced to really look at this and talk about this in a very substantial manner, which is not happening now, or which has not happened in this way. So therefore, I think is the right initiative. Yeah. As it happened in the case of historic slavery, about which we are all concerned. Historic slavery could in certain ways dismantled because of the continued efforts of people, particularly those who have really experienced this. If we look at the case of India, various parts of India, and my research was focused on this, and I find that very substantial mobilization of people who were actually at the receiving end of the social power. So their mobilization was very significant, and along with that, along with this sort of mobilization, we find people creating knowledge on their community, knowledge on their skills, and so on. So we find on both lines, at the level of mobilization and at the level of creation of knowledge, people have been really working hard in the early 20th century. That had a telling effect on many aspects of the structures of inequality. But as I said, today we confront a very different kind of situation in the neoliberal era, where we are talking about this modern slavery, etc. Then I think one significant step is the creation of critical social movements, which would mean that social movements will be in a position to create knowledge. In fact, this is not my own argument. Most scholars who have studied about social movements have argued that in the context of social movements, people who are engaged in social movements, who are part of it, they eventually create knowledge on themselves, on society at large, and that has a liberatory potential. This is the other aspect of it. And the third one is the kind of work which now the institute is engaged in, the advocacy work, working across communities, across social groups that are experiencing worse forms of exploitation. So therefore, we need to combine, hard social science research on these sort of experiences, along with creation of knowledge, and then working along with the people, and then taking this to the government, because absolutely necessary things like policy interventions are required, and that policy interventions, no matter what we say outside the government organizations, outside the legal frame, those things should have an effect on the framers of law, those who are engaged in policy decisions, and those who are engaged in taking policy decisions or the governmental decisions and so on. So therefore, we need to have a conversation using the available platforms. We should go for legal remedies and also take these matters to the international forum. In fact, it has been done. If you look at the presentations today, and particularly the two reports that have been released today, we know that these reports become very substantial documents with absolute proof, hard data to show how much is the prevalence of modern slavery. And therefore, I guess we will take this matter to UN and other agencies where people would be really working across a range of institutions and individuals who can in fact introduce legislations which will outlaw these kinds of practices. And then eventually, as our scholars have been arguing, we need to raise the question of reparations. We need to raise the question of paying back to the communities that have suffered. And in fact, we have scholars like Professor Thorat, who are recognized for their contribution into Indian social sciences, who are raising these kinds of questions. So we are at a particular juncture where we can really release our energies and then really move forward, working across a range of institutions, individuals, etc., finding solutions to the problem that our communities have been facing historically as well as today.